Alice, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for being on the pod. Just before we started recording, you were talking to off air to Gabby about being at the Stadium of Light for England's opener against the USA last week. So, how did you feel being there, given everything that you fought for 30 years ago?
Oh, it's felt pretty surreal actually. If you think the journey of 34 years, it felt really no small sense of pride, but fairly surreal.
Should we kind of go back historically? It's interesting because obviously 1991 being the first Women's Rugby World Cup.
Mm.
It was only 1987 that the first Men's Rugby World
Mm.
Cup actually happened. So it's not a comparable story with women's football in many ways, because I think often people are trying to kind of align what this could mean for the Red Roses compared to the Lionesses. And actually, women's rugby wasn't banned and wasn't something that you could do freely around the country because there just weren't many women's rugby clubs. So to have that idea in 1991, that was quite left field and must have been quite out there to kind of the rugby world.
Well, it was. I think it was a bit of a shock for them actually. It had come out of there'd been a rugby fest in New Zealand, and the Russians had come to that, and the Americans had come to that, and then there was a general kind of European Cup that was held in Bourg-en-Bresse in France in sort of early 1990, I think. Could be in the year before. But the Americans, Canadians, Japanese, all sorts of people said, "Oh, can we come to the European Cup?" Well, it's not really a European Cup if we do that. So Debs Griffin went and presented the idea of a World Cup to the Women's Rugby Football Union, who at that time were in no way affiliated or associated with the RFU or the IRB or anybody. We were just doing our stuff over here. And the WRFU said, "Oh, that's a good idea. Off you go and do it." We all played together. The four of us all played together at Richmond, and she kind of picked us out of the crowd and said, "You, and you," because that was the deal. She would only do it if she could have her own team, and off we went.
How do you go about starting a global tournament?
Well, first of all, you've got to one thing you've got to remember is it's pre-digital times, no internet. How on earth do you find if a country actually has a women's team? So it took a lot of literal snail mail and say, "Do you happen to know anyone plays?" Literally kind of airy conversations. Before then, there was no world rankings. There'd been the odd, maybe twice a year, there'd be an international. So there was no sense of who could play, who did play, and who played to an international standard. So it was all fairly who wants to come, basically. Who can come and who wants to come and who can afford to come.
So did you just have a list of countries and work through them?
Yeah. And all sorts of surprising people to like them, Sweden, Spain, Italy, France. I'm trying to remember them all. Japan had a big Japanese cohort of clubs. Who knew? But Australia didn't play. New Zealand did play. America, Canada. And America were actually miles ahead. They were about 15 years ahead because they weren't allowed to play American football.
Right.
So they played rugby instead.
But this wasn't all plain sailing. You did have a bit of pushback. It wasn't people just opening the door and going, "Yeah, go on, go. Let's go get yourself a World Cup."
Pushback, I think, is an understatement, to be fair.
Tell us a bit about that.
Well, first of all, we had to find someone to do it. And Debs went off to the heartland of Northampton, Leicester, around there, and that was a possibility. And then the Bristol Bath area, that was another possibility. But it was South Wales who were trying to actively promote sports tourism. Said, "Oh, we've got all these little clubs all around South Wales," and the South Glamorgan Council stepped up and said, "Yeah, we'll do an opening ceremony and a closing dinner for you." And the Cardiff County Council did stuff, and they all went. They basically were they were very, very welcoming, and that seemed absolutely the best bet. And they had one key thing was we needed student accommodation for the teams. Because everyone was coming in, everyone was having to pay for their own kit, their own travel, their own accommodation, their own food. I mean, it's an enormous outlay, particularly for the New Zealanders. They cost them about 5,000 New Zealand dollars. So they all had raffles and cake sales and God knows what to get each individual to the UK.
And problems for other teams like the like were they still the Soviet team?
They were
at
still
the
the
ti-
Soviet team
they were-
then, yeah.
So a problem for them because they couldn't get money out of the country, could they?
They couldn't, but they did manage to get 5 crates of stuff out of which consisted of quite a lot of cucumbers, which they ate a lot of, and all sorts of knickknacks that you couldn't possibly want: crappy little watches, flags, Russian dolls, caviar, and vodka.
And they flogged them to sort of pay for their...
Yeah, they did. They did. Yeah.
And so everybody had to come up with their own ways of making money. So what were you guys doing?
We were just paying for ourselves. There was this slight hilarity of sort of so expenses. Well, there's no one to claim it from, and there was no money in the pot, so we just paid.
And at this point, when the energy started going and the ball starts rolling, did World Rugby, did the RFU, did nobody start thinking, oh, this is something that we should get behind?
Oh,
here?
quite the contrary. Debs got called in to the IRFB in Bristol. And she'd just had a baby. She had a 6-week-old baby, so who wasn't terribly keen on being there at all, as you might imagine. And the IRB thought it was denigrating the sport and would devalue the upcoming 91 men's World Cup.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas our view was, actually, we're expanding.
And that was going to be in England, I think, wasn't it? The 91? I think 91
yes,
was
it
England.
was,
I think you're right. And our view was we're doing exactly the opposite. We're actually expanding interest in sport by women playing it and women coming to watch it. And what's the problem? Then they threatened to... my lovely cousin James, who is a professional graphic designer, had produced a lovely logo for us. IRB thought it was too like theirs. So they bounced it and threatened to sue us. Wow. So we had to rethink. James had to rethink the logo, and they wouldn't approve it. So that held up merchandising, printing the programs, printing the tickets, getting stuff done. Everything was held up while we're kind of waiting for the IRB to make their flaming mind up. Am I allowed to say that out loud on this?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. God, you can say stronger if you want.
Well,
you go say whatever you want.
Anyway, but eventually they did approve it, and it was about 6 weeks before the tournament, which it made it very squeaky bum time. And all,
you
the
must
other
have
thing
been fuming, weren't you? Because I think in your very first answer here, you said that no governing body had any affiliation with the WRFU at that time. That they were very much on their own in what they were doing, and nobody else were bothering. And then all of a sudden, they do bother, but in a negative way.
Yeah.
You were fuming, I'm guessing.
We were just stuffed. I mean, we just had to get on with it. I mean, that was our view. We'll just do it. We didn't need their permission to do it because we weren't affiliated, and they weren't going to stop us. So we had this little. I think, in some retrospect, looking back, the fact they didn't like the logo was actually light. That was it was a small thing, and we could resolve that. But it did hold things up. Don't forget, we're organising this around our day jobs.
Yeah, as you've pointed out before, without technology, effectively.
Without technology.
A fax machine was about as sophisticated as it got.
So it was pretty difficult to do at the best of times. But so we've got some in the Rugby Museum at Twickenham. There's evidence of the shirty letters.
Really?
Yes.
So obviously you managed to get 12 teams, all hosted in South Wales, as you said there. And you said before as well, USA were actually, surprisingly to you guys, one of the most kind of sophisticated teams in terms of the training and the amount of players they had, and ended up beating England in the final. 3,000 people came to that
3.5, yeah.
So actually, build it, and they did come.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it didn't give us enough money to make to break even, and there was a big debt left at the end that we four were personally liable for. And
you had to pay off, did you, or did they?
No, there was a sponsorship company who had come in to help us get sponsorship and didn't, because at the time the general view was it was a participation sport, not a spectator sport.
Wow.
So we didn't get any sponsorship at all. We got a couple of grants from the Sports Council, a good chunk of which had to be spent on the cup, which cost about £1,000. much to the annoyance of the three of us. Sue went off and bought it. Went, what? You've spent £1,000?
She spent £1,000 in 1991.
Yes. And it's a very pretty cup, but it's got sort of lacy cuts all around it. You can't drink out of it without getting absolutely soaked. So it's a very pretty. It's in the museum as well. So we were all like, "Oh, you can't spend £1,000 when we haven't got any money anyway." But a chunk of the Sports Council money went to cover that and cover our printing costs, and then we were left with about £35,000 debt at the end.
God.
Most of which was the Russians, because the Russians didn't understand that if you're staying in a bed and breakfast situation at the Cardiff Institute, which is the
Sophia Gardens, was that?
No, that's the Sports Centre for Wales.
Right.
This was the student accommodation.
Oh, okay.
They didn't understand that if the breakfast was there, they only took their own breakfast, and what they did was take everybody's breakfast. So everyone who'd paid for their breakfast was pretty annoyed to find all the breakfast gone.
They ate a lot.
They didn't have any money,
Right.
which is why they were selling stuff, and they couldn't afford the bus fare, and they couldn't afford to wash their shirts. They didn't have any money, because they weren't allowed to bring any dough out of Russia, the Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union, yeah.
So £35,000 worth of debt. So, I mean, could you sum this tournament as it was a sporting success but came at personal cost for the four of you?
Well, it did. Very helpfully, everyone let us sweat for 6 months, which was like, what are you going to do with all these bloody debts? They're all kind of wibbling about what to do. And finally, we managed to, a very lovely man called Dudley Wood, who used to head up the RFU, convinced the sponsorship company to make their fee go away. And then there was about 3-4 grand of the accommodation for the Russians, who also managed to break a sink or a toilet. I can't remember which, but how. Obviously, the vodka was very good. And he just wrote a cheque for the balance. So Dudley Wood was our saviour. But they did let us sweat for 6 months.
And you lost your job.
Working, because I was taking calls at my desk. I was working in an advertising agency from journalists,
Right.
And sending out, using their fax machine to send out press releases
Which
and things.
they didn't take to.
No, and the boss was I can't remember, he was a West Ham supporter, I think. And he didn't like the fact that I would turn up for meetings with a black eye or, a split eyebrow or bits missing, and he hated all of that stuff, and it can definitely contribute to me getting fired.
Alice, when you look at what's happening right now in this country with this World Cup, and already records have been broken in ticket sales, in attendance, the opening game attendance was bigger than any before, the most watched on television on Friday, that game between England and USA. Can you trace the DNA right back to 1991, do you think?
I think we started the dominoes falling. Don't forget, during our World Cup, there were 2 conferences as well. One was about coaching, and one was about the future of the worldwide sport. Because none of us had ever met. All the administrators, coaches, and things, none of us had ever got together. So they had two conferences to discuss where is the worldwide sport going, and the coaching strategies and all that sort of stuff. So all of that, and what the final showed, though England lost, they worked out from the standard. I mean, America were fantastic. Their backs were not just rugby players; they were fantastic athletes.
Yeah.
So any England player say, "Oh, we had them in the forwards." Yeah, it doesn't count, does it? But they then by '94 they worked out how to beat them.
Right.
So there was a huge amount of learning curves. So it did start all sorts of balls rolling. But what's very curious is that here we are 34 years later. Who remembers?
Well, we do.
Yeah.
And you're making a documentary on it, aren't you?
I am trying to. Yes, it's against a massive headwind. Massive headwind.
I feel actually that it's not a documentary; it's a film. I think it can be a documentary, but
it's a feature.
It feels like a movie.
Yeah. This is a still documentary because we found footage in all sorts of strange places around the world.
Okay.
Yes, can't afford the BBC footage, but there we are.
Well,
it's too pricey.
Well, I can't do anything about that.
No, I know.
Sorry.
This
Over to you, Gabby.
Yeah. So,
well, judging by the methods that you managed to get that World Cup off the ground, I'm
yeah.
sure you'll manage to somehow persuade them to cut the price on that. But it's certainly a documentary I would watch, Alice. And thank you so much for coming in and sharing some incredible stories. And keep enjoying this World Cup. Are England going to win?
What I would have liked is that if they'd had a defeat earlier this year and got a bit of bit of soreness, because they're just a bit too good.
Yeah.
But I just don't want them to get. We went to watch them the other day, but I just don't want them to be. Keep it down. Keep it down.
Okay.
I think there's a few interesting countries that are suddenly going to go, oh, they're quite good. So that could be quite interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Sports Agents
with Gabby Logan and Mark Chapman.